I had kept the boilers running at Kestrel Hold for 11 winters, and in all that time I had learned exactly one rule that mattered: don't ask what happens to the ones who fail intake. The hold sat carved into the shoulder of the mountain, 300 souls packed behind granite walls thick enough to stop the wind, and the worst of what came up from the lowlands. People walked for weeks to reach it, following rumors passed hand to hand like currency. They came thin and worn, carrying what they could on their backs, and Director Voss met every one of them at the gate, with the same speech about shelter and order, and the price of belonging. Behind him the garrison stood at parade rest, with rifles slung, and nobody who'd walked that far in the cold ever seemed to notice how carefully that welcome was staged. I fixed the pipes. I kept the heat moving through 11 miles of buried ductwork that would otherwise have killed half the hold by January, crawling through crawl spaces too narrow for most men my size, patching joints by lamplight while the wind screamed against the rock overhead. It had bought me a kind of invisibility I'd come to rely on. Nobody watches the man covered in soot and grease long enough to wonder what he's thinking. I did not ask questions, because a mechanic who asked questions did not stay a mechanic long. Then the transport ships started landing on the North Shelf, and I stopped being able to not ask. I noticed her 3 days before the manifest came down to my station. A small, gray-skinned girl, with eyes too large for her face, sitting outside the intake office, in a chair built for someone twice her size, her hands folded the way a child's hands fold, when an adult has told them to be still, and they are trying very hard to obey. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound at all. She just watched the door the guards had gone through, waiting to be told what came next, with the particular stillness of someone who has already learned that waiting is safer than asking. I asked one of the clerks who she was. "Unclaimed," he said, like it was a shelf designation. No kin on the registry, no sponsor, no labor value they could book against. Flagged for reassignment on the next northbound run. I had heard that phrase before, applied to livestock and old machinery, and twice, to men who'd argued too loudly with Voss's garrison. I went and found the manifest myself that night, using the maintenance override I wasn't supposed to have, and I read every line of it twice, because I did not want to believe it the first time. Reassignment meant the transport ships. The transport ships did not go to other shelters. They went to buyers in the lowland markets who paid in fuel cells and old-world parts for anyone the hold didn't have a use for. Children first, because children carried and sold easiest. Voss had built his sanctuary on the bones of people nobody would come looking for. I want to tell you I decided in some blaze of righteous fury, but that isn't true. What I remember is quieter than that. An old cold settling into my chest that had nothing to do with the mountain outside. I went back to the intake office the next morning with a coil of spliced fuse wire, twisted small, shaped rough into the outline of a bird, and I crouched down in front of her chair, the way you crouch for something easily frightened, and I held it out. She looked at the wire bird for a long moment before she looked at me. Her eyes were pale amber, old in a way a child's eyes shouldn't be. Then she took it, carefully, both hands, like she'd been taught that things given to her might be taken back. "You have a name?" I asked her. It took her a while to answer, like she was deciding whether the question was safe. "Naira," she said. "Well, Naira, I fix things that are broken. I'm going to fix this too." I didn't know yet how. I only knew the shape of what I couldn't do, which was stand in that hallway and let her be loaded onto a transport ship like spare parts, while I went back to my boilers and pretended the pipes were the only thing in this mountain worth keeping warm. The northbound run was 4 days out. I spent them the way a mechanic spends every problem, taking the hold apart in my head, looking for the seam. The garrison watched the main gate and the shelf where the ships landed, but nobody watched the old vent system that ran the heat down from my boilers into the lower levels. Because nobody but me had ever needed to. It was narrow and cold in the unheated stretches, and it led out half a mile down the mountain's east face into a ravine the maps called impassable, which mostly meant Nobody official had bothered to check. I moved her the night before the transport, wrapped in the spare insulation blanket I kept by the boiler, for exactly this kind of theft, and I did not let myself think about what Voss's people did to mechanics who stole flagged cargo, because thinking about it would have stopped me, and I had already decided I would rather be stopped by something with teeth than by my own fear. She didn't ask where we were going. She held onto the strap of my pack and put one foot after the other through vent shafts built for pipe, not people, and she did not make a single sound the whole way down, not even when the cold got into her hands, not even when we heard, once, far off and muffled through rock, the sound of a search beginning behind us. I felt her hand tighten on the strap. That was all. We came out into the ravine an hour before dawn, into air that tasted like snow and pine, and nothing like the recycled warmth of the hold. And I want to tell you the hard part was over. But the hard part was the 2 days after that. Walking a child who had never walked farther than an intake hallway through terrain that would have broken grown men, rationing what I'd been able to carry, listening for engines on the wind and hearing none, not knowing if that was mercy or just Voss deciding a small unclaimed girl and a boiler mechanic weren't worth the fuel to chase. The second night, the cold got bad enough that I gave her my coat over the blanket and kept moving to stay warm myself, and somewhere past midnight, when I thought she'd long since fallen asleep against my shoulder, she asked me why I'd come back for her at all. I didn't have a clean answer. I told her the truth instead, that I'd spent 11 winters keeping a building warm without once asking who it was warm for, and that I couldn't do that anymore once I knew her name. She was quiet a long while after that. Then she asked if the bird had a name too, and I said it hadn't, until she named it, and she did. Something in her own language I never learned to say right. Soft and low, like a word you use only for things you intend to keep. I found the resistance camp the way I'd been told I might, if I ever needed to. A cold fire pit dressed to look abandoned. A mark cut into a fence post that meant safe, further in. They were wary of me until they saw her, and then a woman with gray in her hair and the same pale amber eyes as Naira's came forward so fast she nearly fell, and said a name that wasn't Naira, an older name, one that had clearly been waiting a long time to be spoken again. Naira didn't run to her. She looked at me first, like she was asking permission to want this, and I understood then how long it had been since anyone had let her want anything without a price attached. I nodded. That was all it took. She crossed the space between them at a dead sprint, and the woman went down on her knees in the frost to catch her, and I stood there with an empty pack and cold hands, and watched two people find each other again after however many years the hold's paperwork had stolen from them, and I did not need to be part of that. I had done my part in a mountain 3 miles behind us, in a vent shaft built for pipe. Voss's people came looking, eventually, and found a mechanic's post standing empty, and a manifest line with no explanation attached. And whatever they told themselves about it, I never heard, because I did not go back to find out. I think about the hold sometimes, the boilers I kept running for 11 winters, the walls I trusted to keep people warm without asking who they kept out or who they let Voss sell. I think mostly about the way Naira held that wire bird the whole way down the mountain, in a fist too small to close all the way around it, like it was the first thing anyone had ever given her that wasn't a number on a list. I don't fix boilers anymore. I fix the seams other people build sanctuaries on top of, the quiet gaps where the unclaimed get filed away and forgotten. It is slower work, and colder, most nights. But a warm building is not the same thing as a safe one, and I would rather freeze in an honest ravine than stay comfortable inside a lie.